Hello everyone, and welcome to this video tutorial on how to install Omeka Classic version 3.1 on a Debian 11 based server. My name is Jeremiah and I'm the Systems Librarian at Eastern Oregon University. I like to make comprehensive video tutorials about building open source systems that benefit libraries. So if this is the kind of content that interests you, please consider subscribing to my channel. So what I'd like to do today is just go over all of the steps that are required to build a Omeka Classic on a Debian 11 based server. I did a series on this about 5 years ago. Things have changed a little bit more. I find that the website has changed a lot, and if you were following along in that tutorial, things look a whole lot different these days than they did back then. So I figured now is the time to retire those old videos and focus on something a little more modern. And so currently, this is the very start of 2023. The most recent version of Omeka Classic is 3.1, and Debian 11 is the most recent distribution for Debian Linux. So what I'm going to do is show you how to do this using a VirtualBox virtual machine. So the very first thing that we're going to need to do is I'm just going to open up VirtualBox. And I have the VirtualBox software installed here on my Windows desktop. This is my host machine. I'm just going to go ahead and open this up. I always run it as an administrator. I don't think it's necessary. I think I just kind of got used to doing things that way. So I don't think it's important. And so what we're seeing here is a list of all of the virtual machines that I have set up. If you need a virtual machine to follow along with this video, I do have a tutorial on how to install Debian 11 on VirtualBox, and I'm going to link that in the upper right corner. That video includes how to add a desktop. In this case, I'm not using a desktop environment. This is all done within the terminal. It's more secure, it's more efficient, so I'm just going that route. Whereas in the video where I show how to install Debian 11 on VirtualBox, we do cover how to build things so that you have a desktop environment. Ultimately, it doesn't matter whether you have the desktop environment or not. There are some advantages and disadvantages to that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the video. But mostly I'm doing this specifically in a way where you learn how to do this on a typical server environment. Most servers that host these web-based systems do not use a desktop environment. And what I'm going to do is power this up right now. Much of the work that I'm going to do is actually going to be done in this environment. That way I do have a graphical user interface. I have a better terminal to work with. These VirtualBox terminals are a real pain to work with sometimes. And so I'm going to do this in a different terminal using SSH. And for those who aren't familiar with the term SSH, I forget exactly what it stands for. I think it's just secure shell. And that's the shell that we use to have secure communications between two different computers. So in this case, it's going to be my client computer connecting to the server computer. Okay, so the reason why I'm logging into this server is I need the IP address in order to SSH into it. So I'm just going to put in my credentials here. And there are a number of ways of getting the IP address of your server. I think the easiest is probably just IP space address. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And you'll see that we have two entries here. One is the loopback, and that's just the machine itself. And the other is the NP0S3. And that is my Ethernet connection to the Eastern Oregon University network. So my IP address there is 10.3.20.139, and I highlight it, but I can't because it's the VirtualBox terminal, which is just an example of why I don't want to do this in the VirtualBox terminal. So with that IP address, I can just move this window away. I don't think I need that anymore. However, we do need to keep it open and running so that we can SSH into it. If I shut it down now, I wouldn't be able to SSH into it. So what I'm going to do is actually open up a second machine because I don't want to do this in a Windows environment. I find it's easier to kind of do things in a Linux environment when you're SSHing into a Linux machine. You could also use PuTTY or something like that for this, but I'd much rather use Linux. So I have a virtual machine that I use specifically for this kind of work. It has Debian 11 with a GNOME desktop. And again, I'm going to repost that video that shows how to install Debian 11 with a desktop in the upper right corner. I'm going to go ahead and start this machine. And I think what I'm going to do is just pause as it boots up because it might take a minute or two. Okay, so I've booted up and I've logged into my Linux workstation. So this is the workstation I'll be using here on out. I will no longer be using the Windows host side of things. And I think what we probably want to do first is we'll just SSH into our Omeka server. And I think I should probably make things a little bigger here. I'm going to go with this default. I've programmed that for having a larger font. And I hope that's big enough. I'm actually a little concerned it might not be. So I think I need to go to Preferences. Whoops. And not double click. Jeez, we're not in Windows anymore. I think it's under this Profile section. Ah, yes, the default here. And so under the custom font, I just want to just make that a little bit bigger. 21 seems good. Let's go with that. We'll select that. I'll go ahead and close that. Okay, hopefully that makes things easier to read on the screen. So what we're going to do is SSH into that Omeka server that I've built and that we're going to put everything on. So you can do that with this command. And in the video that I show how to install Debian 11 on, there is a section where I talk about making sure your machine has SSH capabilities. You want to make sure that that's enabled when you build things so that you're able to use the SSH command. You can also install it. And actually, just to be safe, I do want to show people how to go ahead and get things enabled for OpenSSH. Really, the command for it is sudo apt install OpenSSH-server. And you'll see that OpenSSH server is already the newest version. That's because I installed it when I first created this system. So if you find that the command to SSH into things isn't working, you want to be sure to run this. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen. And now I'm going to SSH into the Omeka server that we got the IP address from. So you can do that with the command SSH. And you need the username for that server, which I called jkellogg, which is the same exact one for the system I'm using now. And let's see, and then the @ symbol, and then you can put in the IP address, and let's see, I think it was 10.3.20.139. So your IP address is probably going to be different, so make sure that you have the proper IP here. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And now it's asking for the password on that server. So that user jkellogg has a password on that Omeka server. And let's see. Put that in. I might have had a typo there. Kind of looks like I had a typo. Yeah. That's what happens when I type too fast, I guess. So you'll see that I am no longer in the Debian dev environment or machine. I am now logged into the Omeka tutorial machine, which is exactly where I want to be. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and clear this screen just to keep things clean. And at this point, I think it's a good idea to open up a browser, and we should check out the installation instructions. So we'll go through those installation instructions step by step. Okay, I'm just going to do a Google search for, let's see, Omeka Classic installation. That should give us what we need. So the Omeka Classic user manual, I'm just going to click on that. And under this installation section here, let's first look at the system requirements. We want to make sure we have everything we need before proceeding with the installation instructions. So our system requirements include the Linux operating system, and again I'm going to link to that video on how to install Linux on VirtualBox so that you will also have an environment that has a Linux operating system. The next requirement that we have here is an Apache server. Maybe we want to zoom in on that a little just to hopefully make sure things can be seen on the video screen. So the Apache 2 server, that's what we need for our web server. So what I'm going to do is go back to my terminal. And again, we have remotely logged into the Omeka server, as you can see right here. And usually before we start installing things, it's a really good idea to make sure your system is completely up to date. So you should run the sudo apt update and double ampersand sudo apt upgrade. So what this command does is it updates your apt repository, which is the software repository that Debian uses. And then after that, this is what this double ampersand means. After this is run successfully, then also run the upgrade. So the update's made, and then all of those updates then get implemented using the upgrade command. I do the -y so that I don't have to enter yes when it asks if I actually want to make the changes. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and we need our password for this as a sudo command. And this might take a while. Nope, it won't take a while. That was pretty quick. It might take a while for you. So don't worry if that's the case. Sometimes it can take 5 minutes or so. But now that we have things updated, our apt repository is updated, we can run the command to install Apache and the most recent version of Apache that the apt repository supports. So what I'm going to do is run sudo apt install apache 2-y. I'll show you what happens if you don't use the -y. We'll just go ahead and hit that. So you'll see they're asking if we want to continue with the installation after getting some information about this particular software package, which comes in handy just to know what sort of dependencies are also going to be installed with all of this. So that -y that I usually do at the end of an install command is just a way to get around having to type y here. Okay, so we've installed Apache 2. I've cleared my terminal so that things are a little more organized. Next step, we're going to go back to the instructions, and you'll see that the Apache server requires mod rewrite to be enabled. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now, and we'll do that with the following command. It is sudo, because we need to install this as an administrator, and then the Apache 2 enable module command, which is A2EN mod rewrite. Okay, so we'll go ahead and hit enter for that. The module rewrite is already enabled, and that actually has something to do with how I messed around with things on the virtual machine. So what's going to happen is you should get output that says something along the lines of module installed. In order for it to take, you have to run a system control or a systemd command in order to make it take. And we'll do that in a little bit. But right now, there are a couple of other steps that we should do in order to make the mod rewrite actually work. So what I'm going to do is I want to change directories into cd etc and then Apache 2, and I'm going to go ahead and hit enter and ls to list things here. And you'll see this Apache 2 configuration file. This isn't actually the file that we want to overwrite. What we want to do is actually get a block of code from here so that we can put it into this site's available folder. So first thing we're going to do, I'm going to use the less command for this, and it just displays the text of this file. And I'm going to go ahead and type in, we may have to use sudo, so I'm just going to do that. Sudo less apache2.conf, and I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to scroll down here, and let's see, I forget the actual name of it. Let's see, I think it's in the directory. So let's actually do Control W. Whoops. Or actually, whoops, I'm thinking nano. We don't want Control W. If you hit the /, you can search through all of this text, and really the text that I'm looking for is going to look something similar to this, with the little chevron thing there and directory. And this is what we want. So it is showing us, let's see, what do we want? I think it's this one right here. I'm just going to copy all of this and right click, copy. Okay. And then I can type Q to exit. And now what we're going to do is paste that little chunk of code into the proper file. So we're going to change directories into sites available. So I've made it this far. Now I'm just going to hit tab to autocomplete that and go ahead and hit enter, ls, and you'll see that we have this default configuration file here. This is the one we want to edit. So I'm going to do that with the Nano editor, which comes by default with Debian-based distributions, so you shouldn't have to install it. I'm going to go ahead and sudo nano and 0 and then tab to autocomplete all that and enter. Now there's nothing that we really need to edit that's in here by default. As long as you follow the instructions exactly in this tutorial, you don't need to change anything here. And what I'm going to do at this closing tag here for virtual hosts, I'm just going to paste what I had copied from the original configuration file. And because I'm weird and need this to look a little more orderly, I'm just going to go ahead and tab these things over here. All right. What we need to do is, now that we have this little chunk of code here, we want to allow override for all. Now, putting this chunk of code into this particular file makes it unique to your system, so that when Apache 2 has a major upgrade or something, the configuration file, the default configuration file that we took this code from, may be changed with the upgrade, and you might lose this, and it might, cause some problems. So doing it in this default configuration file kind of saves you that headache of having to go and change things if an upgrade happens to change them. So what I'm going to do at this point is, now that this is here, I'm just going to hit Control S to save, and then I'm going to do Control X to exit out of here. Now, at this point, we can restart Apache 2 and everything should be good. So sudo systemctl restart Apache, and actually you could probably do autocomplete here, maybe not. There we go. Apache 2. Okay, and if we want to check the status on that, we can do systemctl status Apache 2. And you'll see that the service is active. So we should be good there. Another way to check that is to simply go to the IP address. So in this case, it's 10.3.20.139, and as you recall, that is the IP address of the Omeka server. I'm actually using a different Linux machine to view the contents on that server, the web contents. So if I go ahead and hit enter, we'll find that we get the It Works page. So looks like we're all good for Apache 2 at the moment. Okay, let's go back to system requirements. I believe we've got all of that taken care of. Now we need to install MySQL. And I think by default, if you try to install MySQL, I think it actually loads or will install MariaDB. MySQL has kind of turned proprietary, and the MariaDB branch of MySQL remains non-proprietary. So Oracle owns MySQL. They happen to own VirtualBox as well. I think many people in the Linux community feel pretty strongly that things should remain open, and there's worries that MySQL may not. So Debian by default uses MariaDB as its MySQL database. I'm going to go ahead and clear my terminal, and at this point I'm going to install MariaDB, and we do that with this command, sudo apt install MariaDB dash server. Now when you do the dash server portion of this, it installs the client and everything you need in order to actually run a MySQL based server. I'm going to hit enter, and I didn't do the dash y, so I'm going to have to do that here. Go ahead and hit enter. Okay, and after about 30 seconds or so, the installation will be complete. With that installation, a script was included that you can use to actually make this more secure. And I think that's pretty good practice, particularly if you're putting this into production. It's not going to really mess up any of our test stuff, so I think it's probably a good idea for us to just go ahead and go through that process quickly. So the script can be run using this command, sudo mysql underscore secure underscore installation, and I'll hit enter. Okay, so the current password for the root user, there isn't one. It was simply installed, and at this point we can just hit enter because we don't have a password for the MySQL root user. Root user being the user that has full permissions to do everything. We don't want any kind of nefarious characters trying to access our MySQL database, so it makes sense to have a password. But out of the box, there isn't one, and you can just hit enter. So you can hit enter here. Okay, now they're asking if we want to switch to a Unix socket authentication. This makes things really, really complicated, so it's a really bad idea to do that. And honestly, I can't tell you in what situation that's helpful. I suspect there are situations where it is, but we're going to go with no. So just type no here and enter. Now they're asking if we want to change the root password. I think that's a good idea, particularly with the knowledge that our current server, this server where we're installing MariaDB or MySQL, can be remoted into. And if somebody happens to be able to remote into your server and they want to get into MySQL, they're not going to have to figure out what that MariaDB password is. So I think it's a good idea. I'm going to hit Y for yes and just type in my new password. Oops. Okay. Remove anonymous users. Yes, we want to go ahead and do that. Okay, so this next prompt, disallow root login remotely. No, we don't want to do that because we're in this particular tutorial, I'm remotely logging into this server, so it would be a really bad idea to not be able to use the root user simply because we're doing this remotely. It's the only way we can get into this machine more often than not. So I'm going to go ahead and do N for no. Remove test database and access to it. Yes, these are just kind of default databases to give you a sense of how MySQL works. It doesn't really apply to our Omeka installation at all. So let's remove it. And we want to reload privilege tables now. Yes, we might as well do that. Okay, so I think we've done everything we need to for MySQL. Let's run over here. They're just telling us to install it. So our next step is PHP. We have to install PHP. With these two extensions here, not 100% sure what those extensions do. They do kind of fail to mention other extensions that I found are important, particularly for installing Omeka. So we're going to install all of those things as well. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm just going to clear my screen. First thing we're going to do is install PHP. Sudo apt install php-y. Okay, so after a few seconds, PHP will finish installing. You'll see that we have version 7.4 right here. They're telling us we need 5.0 or greater, so we're good there. We'll go back to the terminal. I'm going to clear this again. Okay, so now what we need to do is install a few dependencies that aren't really mentioned in the instructions, as well as some of the ones that are. And essentially what we're installing here are libraries and modules that will allow PHP and Apache and MariaDB to all communicate with each other. If we don't install these, they can't do that and the system won't work. So the command that we're going to need to run is sudo apt install, and we have a few things that we need to put here. So the first is going to be libapache. Let's see, there's a 2 in there, -mod -php. So this will allow Apache and PHP to communicate with one another. We're also going to need php-mysqli. I believe what that does is it allows PHP and the MySQL database, the MariaDB database, to communicate with each other. Okay, and the next PHP module is php let's see, exif. I honestly don't know what that one does. I do know it is necessary though. If you don't include this, your build is going to fail. Let's see, we have one more, php-dom. And so I believe what that does is it allows PHP to kind of look over the HTML that's used to build the Omeka system. Okay, I'm going to do -y so that we don't have to confirm the installation. I think it's probably going to take a few seconds, so nope, it didn't take very long at all. So all of that has been added, and I think we're in good shape there. Let's just run on over to the instructions. So the last requirement we're looking for is ImageMagick. This is a pretty straightforward thing to install. We'll go back to our terminal, clear things out. And to install this, we'll do sudo apt install ImageMagick. Now, Magic is spelt with a K at the end in this case, so you want to make sure not to exclude that, otherwise this won't work. And -y. Okay, after a little while, that installation will complete. I'm going to jump back over to the instructions. So at this point, we've done all of these steps. We should be in good shape to start the installation at this point. So I'm going to go over here and click on the installation link. We've done all of the preparation for installing, and now we can use these 7 easy installation steps to get things up and running. And they're not lying. It is fairly easy, especially if you compare it to something like DSpace. This is a pretty easy system to set up. One of my favorite things about it is it's very hackable. You can go into the PHP and change things, and which is really nice for building custom functionality for the librarians here at Eastern Oregon University. Okay, so right off the bat, they're telling us we can pick the language, which is kind of an odd thing to put first, because we need the latest version of Omeka. We need to download all of that stuff before we can even begin thinking about this. So actually what I'm going to do is we're going to come back to this. I have a lot of viewers that English is not their first language, or they may not speak English completely. So I'll show you how to do that so that those viewers can use the language that they're most comfortable with. So we'll come back to this. First, we're going to go here to the download latest version of Omeka and extract the zip file. So we'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to click on this link. And this great big button in the middle of the page is how we would download Omeka. I don't want to download it to this machine. I want to actually download it to the server itself. So what I'm going to do is right click, and I'm going to choose copy link. And then what I'm going to do is come back to our, well, let's look at the installation instructions first. So download the latest version. Okay, I'm going to kind of skip over all of that because it's not actually what we're doing. I'm going to do clear. We're going to go about this a little easier. I'm going to change directories into the default web directory. So change directories into var www html. I'm going to list the contents here. And remember when we checked Apache, this is the HTML document that it was using to display the It Works page. We don't want that. We don't need it. So we can just remove it with sudo rm index. And don't forget, you can use tab to autocomplete. We'll just remove that completely. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the wget command to download all of the Omeka files into this var www html directory. I don't think it's actually installed on this system, so what I'm going to do is on the Omeka tutorial system, I'm going to do sudo apt install. Let's see what were we installing? Oh, wget. Okay, nope, I already had it, so it's okay. It's always good to just show those commands anyway, just in case people don't have these things installed on their systems. So I'm going to use the wget command. I'm going to have to use sudo because my user doesn't have permissions on this var www html directory path. So we'll do sudo wget, and then at this point we can paste that URL that we copied, and I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And then if I do ls, you'll see that we have this Omeka zip file here. And it's probably unlikely that zip is installed on your system. I don't think it's on mine, so let's just do sudo apt install zip and y for yes. Okay, now we can run the zip commands. Before I do that, I'm just going to clear. Okay, I'm going to run the list command again. So this is the file that we need to unzip. So I'm going to do sudo unzip Omeka, and at that point I can just tab. All right, so we have unpacked all of that. If I do the ls command now, you'll see that we now have this Omeka-3.1 directory, which is going to be the root directory for our Omeka application. We no longer need this zip file, so I'm just going to remove that with sudo rm, and then I'm just going to asterisk and zip, and that'll just get rid of that. Okay. That directory name, Omeka-3.1, is a little bit more than I want. So at this point, I want to change the name of that. And I'm going to do it with this command, sudo mv. Let's see here. I want to make sure I have the right. Yeah, I do. All right, so sudo move. I guess I'm just going to do // which means current directory. Omeka 3.1, and I'm going to now call it Omeka rather than -3.1. Okay. And this is going to make things a little easier when we go to view things in the browser. We won't have to use that. We can just use this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and clear. And let's go back to the instructions. So we've downloaded the latest version of Omeka. We didn't really go with any of this stuff here, so we don't need to really do anything else for the download. Let's go back to picking your language. So what we're going to do is, let's see, we'll go, well, what they're saying is you'll need to configure it in the application config.ini file. Okay, so what we need to do is change into the root directory of Omeka. From this point, we can just use cd Omeka. I'll do ls to list all of the contents of the Omeka directory, all of this stuff here. And really the directory we're after here, we want to go into applications. So let's cd application. And then what was the next thing? Configuration, I think. Let's see. Yeah, config. So cd config ls. Let's list the contents there. So this config.ini file is the file we would need to go to change the language. And you can do that with sudo nano config and then tab to autocomplete. And under this localization section here, we can change the default language under locale.name. Now the default is English. You can use any valid, well, I think Omeka only supports certain ones, but you can use the ISO codes. I'm not going to change anything here because I don't speak any language other than English, so I'm going to go with the default. But I do want to point out in the instructions, if you click on the C configuring language for details, you can get the code for the language that you want to update to and change to. Like I said, I don't think all languages are represented here. I think Omeka only supports what they have here. It's a decent sized list anyhow. So hopefully you can find the language that you would like to set things to there. I'm going to hit the back button, and so you can also go through the rest of these instructions using the English, and you can change things once you've installed everything successfully. Okay, I'm just gonna go back here quickly, Control X to get out of there. Let's see, I'm just gonna clear the screen again. Okay, and now we can go to the next steps. So we've covered language. Whoops. We've picked our language. Okay, we've downloaded Omeka. Now we're going to look at step 2 here. and create the MySQL database on your web host. So in our case, we installed MariaDB on the Omeka server itself. Let's see. So logging into MariaDB is pretty easy with Debian. We can do it with sudo MariaDB, and that opens up the MariaDB prompt. So we are now using the MySQL terminal to run commands, which means we can run MySQL commands. And I think the first thing we want to do is create the database, the Omeka database, and we can do that with this command. We'll do create database, and I guess it's more of a directive than it is a command. Create database. I want to call that database Omeka. I recommend you do the same so that you can, so that when we get further into the instructions, you know precisely what it is we're using. Like if you don't use the same database name here, later on when I say the Omeka database, perhaps you won't remember what it was you named it. So I recommend just going with what we're doing here. So I'm going to create a database. I'm going to call it Omeka. Now they told us that the default character set needs to be UTF-8, so we can do that with this directive. Let's see, it is default character set, and then we can just put UTF-8. And then we have a, let's see, I think there's something else they want us to do. Make sure the collation of your database and the char set is, okay, so we need to make sure the collation is this UTF-8 Unicode CI. And so we can do that with this directive. So we'll call default collate UTF-8 Unicode underscore CI. And we want to complete our directive with a semicolon, and then we want to hit enter. So it looks like we're good there. Now what we need to do is create a user for this database, and we can do that with this command, grant all privileges on Omeka. That's the database we just created, and then dot asterisk. So what that means is dot kind of separates the database from the data tables. So this asterisk is saying include all databases, all tables in the Omeka database. Okay, and we want to grant all of that to, now I'm creating the user now and I'm calling it Omeka user. I suggest you do the same. At localhost, which is this server, because this all lives on this server. If we were tapping into a MySQL database on a different server, we would have to put that address here. I don't recommend doing that unless you really know what you're doing. Okay, Omeka user at localhost, and then we have to put in the password. So identified by quote, single quote, password. Now this is the password. You can put whatever you want here. I tend to use password for all of my test environments. They're not accessible through any networks, so it's perfectly safe to do that, and that way I don't forget what my password is. So we want to complete this with the semicolon, hit enter. Okay, so we should be good. Now what we're going to do is exit MariaDB. So this prompt with exit, type out exit and semicolon and enter. And we're back into our Unix terminal. Okay, let's go back to our instructions. All right, we've already done the first 3 steps there. So now we're on step 4. in the directory created by the extraction process when we unzipped our files, find and open your database configuration file named db.ini. Okay, easy enough to do. And then what they're saying is we want to replace the X values in that file with some information about our database. So we're going back to our terminal, and if we cd var www html Omeka, so this is our root directory for the Omeka application. I'm going to hit enter and then ls to list the contents, and you'll see that our db.ini file is located there. We can edit it with sudo nano db.ini. And so we need to replace all of the X's here with the right information. So in this case, the host is going to be localhost because our database is on the same server here, so we're good there. Username, let's see, I'm pretty sure, yeah, it's Omeka user. So remember when we did the grant all privileges bit to create this Omeka user? That's when I created this Omeka underscore user. And then the password that user is identified by. So remember I had put in password for that. And then we need the database name. And in this case, I just called it Omeka. So as long as you followed the MySQL directives exactly the way I did, this is what your db.ini file should look like. So at this point, I'm going to hit Control S for save, and then Control X to exit out of there. And I believe that's all we need to do for step 4. You can edit. Yeah, we edited the file, telling us not to change certain things. You can always look at this database configuration if you're interested in learning more about those fields. Okay, so we are done with step 4. We are now on step 5. So upload the directory and all of its contents. Okay, so we're doing this all in the command line, and I think these instructions are for people that like to use FileZilla or something like that, so that they don't have to use the command line. So really, we can just ignore all of this because we have done things in the command line. Okay, so let's go to step 6. Make Omeka's file storage directory and its subdirectories writable by the server. This is why we enabled mod read write earlier on. And as long as you did everything exactly the way I did, you shouldn't have any problems with setting this part up. So the way we would do this is if we go to the terminal and we're in our root directory for Omeka, if I just run the list command here, you'll see that we have a directory called files. We need to make sure that this is writable by the web server. And the way we're going to do that, first I'm just going to clear this screen. I'm going to run the ls-la command. And you'll see that this particular directory is currently owned by root. And root is able to read and write and execute anything that's in this file. But we don't want root to do that. We want our web server to be able to do that. When we installed Apache 2, the Debian system created a new user for us called www-data, which is your web server user. If we simply change ownership of this files directory to that www-data user, we should be in good shape. So I'm going to run that command first, and we do that with the chown command, chown. So we'll do sudo chown. Let's see, we want to do this recursively so that everything within that directory is owned by the proper user, by our web user. So to do that, you do -R, And now I'm just going to do www, and actually if I hit tab it should autocomplete for me. We're just going to do the user. We're not going to worry about groups. Root will still be recognized as a group user for this, which isn't a problem. So we're gonna do that, and then we want it on that files directory. And I'm actually going to do the full path just to be sure. So var www html and files. Oh nope, we have to go to Omeka and then files. Okay, I think that's everything we need. Now if I do ls-la, you'll see that the root or the web user now has ownership of this files directory, and it has read, write, and execute permissions. Just in case that's not how things worked out in your case, what I want to do is show you at this point how you would make sure this user can write to this directory. So I'm going to hit clear, and I'm going to modify that directory with the chmod command. So sudo, and we want to do this recursively too, but first chmod -r, so we got to do this recursively again. And then we're going to give the permission of 751, and I believe it's called an octal permission. In any case, 7 gives full permission for the owner. It gives only limited permissions for anybody that's in that group, so in this case root. And then I forget what one is, it might be execute for anyone. In any case, this is the command you're going to want to use to get the permissions that you need on the right directory. So we're going to go through the whole path again. HTML, Omeka, files. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. That shouldn't have changed anything at all. We still have the same permissions, but I ran that command simply to make sure that anyone watching this video that isn't comfortable with this sort of thing is guaranteed to have the right permissions. So it may not have been necessary, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Okay, so now let's look at our instructions again. All right, so they're giving us directions about older versions, and okay, so we're good for step 6. We're now on step 7. Open your web browser and visit the URL where you uploaded the Omeka directory. Okay, so we can do that here. They kind of give an example of how that's done. And I think actually before we do that, I think what we need to do is restart the Apache server, because we've kind of done a lot of configurations that haven't taken simply because we haven't restarted Apache. So we'll do that with sudo system control restart Apache Apache 2. Okay, now we can go to our web browser and let's see, so we already have the Apache page loaded. And because I am using things remotely, I'm not doing this all on the same machine. Like my web browser is actually on my Debian development virtual machine and not on my Omeka machine, which is nothing but the command line. So I can't use localhost here, because what's going to happen is it will be the local host for the wrong machine. So I can't do that. I have to use an IP address. If you installed everything on the same computer and you're using the same computer to access the internet or a web browser, then you can use localhost. But in our case, we can't do that. So you'll remember that we called that directory Omeka. Remember when we changed Omeka-3.1 to just Omeka? That's the directory that we're trying to access right now. So after the IP address, you need to do /Omeka and then enter. And if everything was done properly, you should see this page right here. If it's completely blank, you're probably missing a PHP module. That's usually the problem that I encounter. In order to figure that sort of thing out, I have to go into the logs. And so if you do run into problems, I would recommend just going into your logs to see if you can figure out what to do or what's missing. Of course, showing people that is kind of outside of the scope of this video. Maybe I should make one about checking logs specifically, because it's not always apparent or obvious where you're supposed to go to find that stuff. But I'm always happy to help people. So leave a comment if you run into problems. I can kind of help you guide you through where you might find the proper log that will tell you what the problem is. So what I'm going to do here is we need to create our default super user account. I'm just going to go with jKellogg. You can put whatever you want there. Password, whatever you would like. I'm just going to put in password. Same deal. Just put in my email. A lot of this auto completes for me because I've been through the process before. Let's see, site title. Oh, just test site sounds good. So only the fields with an asterisk are required. I'm not going to bother with site description or any of this other stuff. Some of the required fields have defaults. I'm just going to stick with those. You can change those after you've made the installation, so don't worry about that. Now I'm just going to click install. Sure, we can save that. And now they're telling us Omeka is installed. So, we can check out the public site or we can go to the admin dashboard. I'm just going to go over to the admin dashboard. And then I'll put in the username and password that I had just created. It's auto-completing for me because I've done this a few times on this Debian development machine, so it's all saved for me. So I'm going to go ahead and press login. And it looks like everything is up and running at this point. I think in order to just be absolutely certain that everything is installed the way we want, I think I'm just going to add a new collection really quickly here. We'll call it test collection. I'm going to make it public. Add collection. Okay, so we have successfully added that collection. Let's add an item. I'm going to go ahead and add item. Just call it test item. Now we use this mostly for digitized images. So I guess in my case I want to upload an image file just to make sure everything is working the way we want. I'm going to go into item data and make it a still image. And I think we'll go ahead and hit public, add item. That should be good. So at this point we can look at the test site itself. Not a lot to look at here. There are various themes that are available to you. You can also go in and change the CSS really easily. I suppose that's probably for another video, another time. But this should get everything up and running for you so that you can play around with the system, make sure it works the way you intend it to. Let's see, we can go ahead and just click on test collection here. Now, why are they saying, so under the items, I didn't choose the collection. So if we go back to admin, and you can do that by just putting admin at the end of your URL there. I can just go into the items, I can edit this, and I had forgotten to select the test collection there. Save changes. And we can go back to the test site. So at this point, if we go to browse collections, you can view items in this collection. And so what they would do is just list them all down there. Okay, so at this point, it's time for you to explore and kind of figure out how things work. I tend to only stick to the back side of things, I don't really like making videos on the user interfaces. I think it's probably easier for people just to play around and figure that kind of thing out on their own. Um, but if you do have back-end questions for this sort of thing, any kind of Unix related questions, I'm happy to try to help. I can't always find the time to do that, but when I can, I most certainly will. I'm also open to suggestions about other systems that people would like to see videos made about. I don't necessarily have to be using that system here at Eastern Oregon University. I kind of like to play around with these things. I find the more of these systems I build, the better understanding I have of the systems that we actually do implement here. And a lot of these things are built on the same thing. Linux, PHP, Apache, MySQL. You know, the more of these systems you play around with, the easier it is to kind of implement open source at your own institution. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for watching. And again, if this content was helpful for you, please hit the like button. And I hope to see you in future videos. Thanks again.